Ah, I see the shadows have brought you back. Welcome to today's story. When a man tries to put the shadows of the past behind, he finds the shadows of the future much darker. The night was thick with darkness as the rain relentlessly pounded against the car's windshield, distorting the world outside. The tires skidded on the wet road as Mark struggled to keep control. A moment of chaos, a flash of blinding light, and then everything went silent. When Mark opened his eyes, he found himself disorientated, surrounded by the harsh, sterile scent of antiseptic. The steady beeping of machines invaded his consciousness. It took him a moment to realize he was in a hospital room, alone. The memories rushed back like a torrential wave, and he winced in pain. The accident, the crash that stole his wife from him. Panic gripped his chest as he tried to recall the details. The doctors had already spoken to him earlier, their words a blur. All he could comprehend was the cruelty of reality. He had survived. His wife hadn't. His body ached with every movement. Broken ribs and fractures throbbed in protest, a cruel reminder of the violent collision. Mark couldn't bear the thought of returning to the home they had built together, drowning in memories of a life that had been ripped away. The house echoed with her laughter, and every corner whispered her name. The decision was made in the sterile hospital room. He couldn't endure the weight of their shared past any longer. Mark decided to escape the suffocating embrace of those memories, seeking refuge in a new beginning. He needed a place far removed from the ghostly echoes of his former life. In the days that followed, Mark purchased a small, isolated house in the heart of the countryside. The solitude it offered seemed like a sanctuary, a place where he could attempt to heal the wounds that ran deeper than visible bruises. The new house stood as a silent witness to his grief, surrounded by towering trees that whispered in the wind. Mark, determined to sever ties with his painful past, moved in with only the essentials, carrying the weight of sorrow in every step. The first night in the new home was unsettling. The creaking floorboards and the distant howling of the wind felt like an eerie symphony, amplifying the solitude that enveloped him. As Mark lay in bed, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, he began to hear whispers, soft and distant. In the dim glow of the moonlight, a figure materialized at the foot of his bed. Mark's heart raced as he recognized the silhouette. It was her, or at least it seemed to be. The apparition of his wife stood there, a ghostly visage with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through his soul. "Mark," the spectre spoke, her voice echoing with an otherworldly quality. "We can be together here. Just you and me." Mark's eyes widened in disbelief. Was this a manifestation of his grief, or was he truly witnessing the spirit of his departed wife? The figure urged him to wait, to prepare, promising a reunion beyond the veil of life and death. Little did Mark know, the spirit that stood before him harbored dark intentions. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the heavy cloud cover as Mark awoke. Tangled in a web of uncertainty, the events of the previous night clung to his consciousness like a fading nightmare. Was it a dream conjured by grief, or had he truly encountered a spectral presence in the quiet hours before dawn? His body felt heavy, as if the weight of the unknown pressed upon him. Rising from the bed, Mark rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the remnants of the night's enigma. The unfamiliar surroundings of the new house loomed around him, shrouded in an uneasy stillness. Determined to dispel the lingering unease, Mark decided to venture into the local town for supplies. The drive took him through winding roads, flanked by dense woods. The towering trees casting elongated shadows that seemed to dance in the corners of his vision. As he entered the small town, its quaint charm did little to ease the persistent knot in his stomach. Mark parked his car in front of the weathered convenience store. its paint faded and windows bearing the scars of years gone by. The bell above the door jingled as Mark entered, and the creaking floorboards announced his presence to the elderly man behind the counter. The store owner, a weathered figure with a mop of thinning grey hair, peered over the top of his glasses at Mark. "Morning, stranger. You new around here?" the owner inquired, his voice carrying the weight of years spent in the quiet town. Mark nodded, exchanging pleasantries as he gathered the supplies he needed. The owner eyed him with a curious glance, squinting as if trying to discern something beneath the surface. "You the one who bought the old Randolph place?" the man asked, a glint in his eye. Mark hesitated, but eventually nodded. "Yeah, that's me. Just needed a change of scenery." The store owner leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Been on the market for quite some time, that place. Some say it's cursed. Strange things happening there since Mrs. Randolph passed away about 20 years ago. People in town swear it's haunted." Mark's pulse quickened at the mention of the haunting. The spectral encounter from the night before flashed in his mind. He tried to play it cool, dismissing it as mere superstition. Ghosts and curses. I don't believe in that stuff. The store owner merely shrugged, a wistful look in his eyes. "Believe what you want, but old stories have a way of lingering. Just be careful, son. Some say the past never truly leaves that place." Mark left the store with his purchases, the warning echo in his thoughts. The drive back to the house was filled with an uncomfortable silence, the weight of the old town settling over him like a heavy fog. Arriving home, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the air around the house held secrets. The walls seemed to whisper stories of long-forgotten tragedies, and the ghostly encounter from the night before gained an unsettling credibility. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the isolated property, Mark couldn't suppress the growing curiosity that dagged at the edges of his consciousness. The night draped itself over Mark's newfound refuge, casting the isolated house into a sea of shadows. The day's mundane tasks had done little to dispel the lingering unease that had taken residence within him. As the clock ticked away the hours, Mark retired to his bed, hoping that sleep would be a fleeting escape from the mysteries that clung to the old Randolph property. The room was enveloped in darkness, the only illumination coming from the faint glow of the moon filtering through the curtains. Mark lay in bed, eyes staring at the ceiling, as he wrestled with the weight of exhaustion and grief that threatened to pull him under. Somewhere between the realms of wakefulness and dreams, a strange noise jolted Mark from his uneasy slumber. His eyes snapped open, the room silent, except for the rhythmic pounding of his heart. The air felt charged with an otherworldly energy as he strained to identify the source of the disturbance. Mark sat up, the bed springs creaking beneath him. He scanned the room, his gaze darting between the shadows that clung to the corners. Nothing seemed out of place. For a moment, he dismissed the noise as a figment of his imagination, a byproduct of the haunted reputation that clung to the property. But then, in the silence that followed, he saw her, a spectral figure, ethereal and bathed in an eerie white glow. The shape of a woman stood at the foot of his bed, and Mark's heart skipped a beat. The features were indistinct, obscured by a haunting mist that clung to the apparition. "I miss you, darling," the voice echoed through the room, a haunting melody that sent shivers down Mark's spine. The words hung in the air like a mournful refrain, reaching into the depths of his grief-stricken soul. A surge of hope and despair collided within Mark as he strained to see the face of the apparition. Could it be her? His beloved wife reaching out from beyond? The figure beckoned him with ghostly arms, a siren's call that pulled at the frayed edges of his sanity. "Is it you?" Mark's voice trembled with a mixture of anticipation and fear. "Are you really here?" The figure in white spoke again, her voice a whisper that seemed to caress his very soul. "Soon we will be together again, my darling. Just a little longer." As quickly as she appeared, the spectral presence faded, leaving Mark alone in the oppressive silence. The room felt colder, emptier, as if the very essence of the apparition had absorbed the warmth from the air. "Now we're going to have a short scare break while you ease your nerves. So while you're waiting, don't forget, if you're enjoying the content, go ahead and stab that subscribe button right now. As doing so, you'll really help the professor spread his shadow of evil. Now, let's get back to the story." Mark, overcome with a whirlwind of emotions, collapsed back onto his bed, exhaustion weighing heavily on him, a crushing burden that threatened to pull him into the depths of an endless abyss. The encounter with the ghostly figure left him teetering on the edge of belief and disbelief, a precipice where the mysteries of the old Randolph property beckoned, and the line between the living and the dead blurred into an indistinct shade of grey. As sleep claimed him once more, Mark drifted into a restless dreamscape, haunted by visions of the woman in white and the enigmatic forces that had awaited him in the shadows of the night. The routine of Mark's daily life continued in the secluded house as he went about his chores. The encounter with the mysterious apparition lingered in the recesses of his mind. The knock on the door shattered the quiet routine as he found himself face to face with a neighbor from over the hill. "Hello, I'm your neighbor. Well, as close as. I'm from the house over the hill there. Just popped by to say hi." The young woman greeted him, her smile warm and genuine. Mark, though initially hesitant, welcomed the company. A need for human interaction, even in the mists of solitude, tugged at him. "Hello," he replied, inviting her in. They exchanged pleasantries, and Mark learned that the woman had been living in the area for a few years. As the conversation flowed, Mark couldn't help but be drawn to the topic that had been haunting him since he arrived, the history of the old Randolph property. "Do you happen to know anything about the people who owned this place before me?" Mark asked, trying to sound casual. The woman hesitated for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. "I only know about the 2 owners, including you. People don't tend to stay here for very long. The couple before you, they left after about 3 months. Complained about strange noises, seeing things." Mark's heart skipped a beat at her words. "What kind of things?" he pressed, urgency colour in his voice. The woman shrugged, her expression uncertain. "Not sure, really. They didn't go into much detail. Just said the house felt off." A shiver ran down Mark's spine as he nodded, concealing the turmoil within him. The mysterious occurrences weren't confined to his experiences alone. The old Randolph property seemed to have a dark reputation, one that whispered of unsettling phenomena. Before Mark could delve further into the conversation, the woman excused herself, mentioning that she was just over the hill if he ever needed anything. As she got into the car and started to drive away, she glanced back at the house. In that fleeting moment, she swore she saw the figure of an old woman in the window, staring at her with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. Anxiety gripped her momentarily, but when she looked again, the window was empty, the stern figure gone. She shook off the unease, attributing it to an overactive imagination. Nevertheless, a seed of doubt had been planted, and as she disappeared over the hill, Mark was left alone once more, grappling with the shadows that seemed to weave through the fabric of his newfound isolation. The night descended upon the old Randolph property like a shroud, and Mark succumbed to the embrace of sleep. Dreams, or perhaps nightmares, danced at the edge of his consciousness, weaving a tapestry of the past and spectral encounters that had begun to haunt his every waking moment. Suddenly, Mark was ripped from the comforting realm of dreams by an unsettling symphony of noises echoing through the quiet house, He sat up, the oppressive darkness pressing down on him. Determination gripped him, fueled by a growing need to confront the mysteries that lingered in the shadows. Leaving the comfort of his bed, Mark moved cautiously through the dimly lit hallways, following strange sounds that seemed to beckon him. At the end of the corridor, a figure stood, ethereal, cloaked in white, and calling out to him. "Soon we will be together again, my darling," the voice echoed, its haunting melody resonating through the walls. Intrigued and anxious, Mark followed the figure as it drifted down the hallway. However, as it passed by a mirror hanging on the wall, an unsettling revelation unfolded. The reflection in the mirror betrayed the apparition's guise. An old hag, aged and decrepit, stared back at him with hollow eyes. Mark's gaze lingered on the reflected horror, his breath catching in his throat. The image in the mirror noticed his scrutiny, and the reflective surface frosted over in an instant, obscuring the grotesque vision. "What the?" Mark began to say, but before he could comprehend the surreal sight, an overwhelming fatigue swept over him. His eyelids grew heavy, and his limbs felt like lead. Barely able to keep his eyes open, Mark stumbled back to his bedroom and collapsed onto the bed. The next thing he knew, sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting the room in shades of gold. Confusion clouded Mark's mind as he glanced at the clock. 4 p.m. He had slept through the entire day, lost in a slumber that felt more like a descent into an abyss. The day wore on, and the enigma surrounding Mark's new residence deepened. Sally, the concerned neighbour from over the hill, decided to pay him another visit, her intentions pure, driven by a desire to check on his well-being. As Sally approached the pathway to Mark's house, she couldn't shake the unease that lingered from the previous night's spectral encounter. Glancing into her rearview mirror, she was met with a shocking sight. An old hag, wrinkled and grey, screaming at her, "He's mine!" Startled, Sally slammed on the brakes, her heart pounding in her chest. She checked the back seat and found nothing, just the chilling echoes of a voice that seemed to claw at her sanity. Shaking off the disconcerting moment, she continued driving to Mark's house. Upon arrival, she was met with an eerie scene, a face in the window. The old hag, gazing at her with malevolent eyes that seemed to pierce into the depths of her soul. As Mark opened the door, Sally couldn't conceal her shock. "Mark, are you okay? You look exhausted and older." "Just tired," Mark replied, his demeanor strained. "Come in." But as Sally tried to cross the threshold into Mark's home, an unseen force pushed her back, a violent energy that knocked her onto the ground. Confused and alarmed, she exclaimed, "Something is wrong here, Mark." They eventually made their way inside, but as Sally walked down the hallway, she passed the same mirror that had revealed the hag to Mark the night before. The reflection within spoke again, the voice chilling her to the core. "He's mine!" Shaken, Sally excused herself to use the bathroom, feeling a sudden wave of nausea. As she looked into the bathroom mirror, her own reflection stared back at her, aged and old. Terrified, she whispered to herself, "I need to leave, I need to leave." Mark wished her well as she left, watching her car drive off with a heavy heart. As Sally glanced into the rearview mirror, intending to wave goodbye, she saw Mark standing at the door, but the old hag now loomed right behind him, a spectral warning that echoed through the unraveling mysteries of the haunted house over the hill. Mark, unsettled by Sally's visit, the inexplicable events that seemed to be draining his strength, succumbed to the weariness that clung to him like a shadow. As he drifted into a restless sleep, the dreams that awaited him spoke in unsettling whispers. In his dream, Mark found himself within the confines of his own house. The porch held a familiar sight, his wife sitting in a chair, bathed in an ethereal glow. He approached, but his movements felt sluggish, as if wading through thick fog. As the scene unfolded, the image of his wife transformed, the features distorting into those of the disfigured old hag with a grey face and sunken eyes. In her gnarled hands she held raw meat, tearing at it with a ravenous hunger. "You're mine now," the disfigured feature declared, its voice a twisted symphony of malevolence. Mark awoke with a jolt, the dream's echoes lingering in a bitter aftertaste. The clock displayed midnight, and darkness enveloped the isolated house. The haunting noise returned, urging Mark to investigate. Moving through the silent corridors, he encountered her, the woman in white. "My love, we'll be together again soon. The time is coming," the figure whispered, its voice carrying an eerie anticipation. "Who are you?" Mark demanded, his voice edged with both fear and curiosity. The expression on the figure's face shifted, turning from a serene countenance to one of anger and resentment. "Your wife," it declared, grabbing Mark by the shoulders. In that moment, the room seemed to close in, and Mark felt an overwhelming fatigue. He collapsed, his consciousness slipping in and out like a flickering flame. As Mark tethered on the edge of awareness, a vision unfolded in the mirror. The disfigured old hag loomed over him, an image of malevolence, feeding on his very essence. The boundaries between dream and reality blurred, and Mark struggled against the unseen force that sought to consume him, trapped in a nightmarish dance with the spectral forces that whispered of an impending reunion. "I've got to get out of here," Mark muttered to himself, determination coursing through his weakened body. Crawling towards the front door, he strained against the unseen force that sought to bind him to the haunted house. But there, standing in the doorway, was the old hag, the embodiment of malevolence that had tormented him since his arrival. "A man's place is at home with his wife," she sneered. "You're not going anywhere." A cold, bony hand clamped onto Mark's ankle, and he felt himself being dragged back down the hall. "Mrs. Randolph, I'm not your husband," he shouted in desperation. Silence hung in the air before chaos erupted. "You'll not be mixing with that hussy from over the hill. I know you, I know what men are like. You'll stay here forever." The hag's voice echoed through the oppressive stillness. Mark passed out, drained and exhausted, the old hag on top of him, feeding on his very essence. As Mark teetered on the brink of death, a blinding light emerged from behind the hag. "No!" she screamed. "He's mine, mine, mine!" Mark squinted, his eyes barely able to open in the brightness. There, his wife, beautiful, ethereal, smiling at him. "Get out now, Mark," she urged. With a newfound surge of strength, Mark scrambled to the door. Outside, headlights from Sally's car blared into the house, illuminating the darkness. Sally, from over the hill, had arrived just in time. She pulled Mark into the car. "Let's go," she insisted. Mark looked back as they drove off, witnessing the hag staring out of the window. "I'm never going back," Mark declared. "A woman visited me in my dreams," Sally confided. "She said to help you. I knew I needed to get you out." "That was Emily, my wife. She saved me, I think. Or was it your lights? I don't know anymore. But I'm never going back in that house," Mark declared. The weight of the haunted memories lifted as they drove away, leaving the shadows of the past behind them. The haunted house over the hill, with its malevolent spirits and vengeful spectres, would remain in the rearview mirror, a chapter closed and a newfound sense of freedom ahead. And if you're still looking to fulfill your thirst for more horror, don't forget to check out this next video. Unless, of course, you're frozen with fear already.